Okay, good afternoon everyone. Today we'll be dealing with a very important topic apart from MCQ discussion. So all of you can read out this case. A blood sample from a 4-year-old boy with abdominal pain was sent to the laboratory from an accident and emergency department. Some of the results were as follows. The total bilirubin is 0.9, ALT 14, ALP 400, albumin 4 gram per deciliter, GGT is 14, and so if you look at the laboratory results, what is the abnormal laboratory result in this baby or in this 4-year-old boy? Can anyone text me in the WhatsApp? Which parameter is abnormal in this baby? This 4-year-old boy has come with an history of abdominal pain, and the routine laboratory investigations were sent and the results were received, and someone says it is ALP. Do you think ALP is the reason here? No, because there is a mistake here. All the results are normal in this boy, actually speaking. The patient's age was not given on the laboratory requisition form. Whenever you go to any lab, they are going to give you something called laboratory requisition form on OPD basis. In IPD, the doctor will do the job. Doctor and the nursing staff does that kind of job. But in a OPD patient, suppose you want to get your test, laboratory test done, they're going to ask you what is the age, what is your name, what is the gender, and all that, right? The patient's age was not given on the laboratory requisition form. Henceforth, what does the computer does? It took it as an adult age, hence the ALP was raised. Actually, in this 4-year-old boy, the normal range of ALP in this 4-year-old boy should be around 40, that is 60 to 425 units per liter. This is a normal range for 4-year-old child. But since the laboratory requisition form did not had age of the child, it has taken it as an adult age. For the adult, it is the normal range is different. It is up to 125. But here it is a child. Always remember, the growing children have got increased ALP levels because of the active bone growth. So the normal range in children is definitely different from the adult ALP range. Okay. So here actually it is normal. Actually 400 units per liter is normal, because for a 4-year-old child the normal ALP is somewhere between 60 to 425. So this is very important aspect. So I'll tell you what is the topic that we are going to deal with today. But for now, just remember, the age of the patient is very important when you give your blood sample, which has to be an important parameter which is to be noted. Next case. You must answer this question. A 10-year-old boy was brought to the diabetes information stand at a show. A voluntary screening group had just diagnosed diabetes on the basis of finger prick glucose, which was showing when the 10-year-old boy, he was being checked with the glucometer with the help of finger prick. The reading was 11 millimole per liter. 1 millimole is equal to 18 milligram per deciliter. Okay. So it was definitely more than the normal range. His distraught mother begged for the help. She got tensed. How come my child is diabetic so soon at this age? A 10-year-old boy having glucose level of 11 millimole per liter, anybody for that matter would be tensed, right? And she becomes restless. The mother of that boy becomes restless, and she, she's begging for the help. So what could have been wrong in this baby? Tell me. And the baby, the boy does not have a history of family history of diabetes. Both his parents were absolutely non-diabetic, and he has no strong family history of having grandchildren suffering from parents suffered from diabetes and all. So what could be the reason in this boy? Can anyone guess what may be the reason? When they did finger prick blood sampling, it was raised. Can anyone? Often had chocolates or food. Do you think if he had chocolate or food, it will raise his blood sugar? That means his insulin is not functioning. Many of the children do have chocolates. Many of them have sweet foods. But do you think all the children are diabetic? Of course, the body will fight to counteract the blood glucose levels to bring it to the normal range by producing insulin, right? So why will they land up with diabetes if they eat chocolates? No. Any other answer? Growth hormone is glucogenic. Child might have eaten chocolates or food. I think who is this who has answered? He has eaten chocolates or food. You're closer to the answer, but in what way? You look at the answer now. That boy was clutching a large sticky lollipop in his hand, and after a thorough hand wash, actually the first precaution that has to be taken when you are doing finger prick blood glucose estimation is that you have to clean the area with the 70% alcohol, right? The area cleaning was not done since it was a diabetic camp. We had a huge number of patients for the check. Hence, for the pre-analytical factor that had come into the picture was that the hand washing or the area cleaning was not done because the baby was having a lollipop in his hand and he was continuously eating that. Because of that, it had a and without cleaning the finger, the nurse or the medical practitioner who has performed the test, it has shown 11 millimole per liter. And remember here, after a thorough hand wash, his finger prick glucose was 4 millimole per liter. So it's a very interesting case, right? So that means whenever you are taking a blood sampling, the area preparation and using 70% alcohol to clean the area is very important. Now, today's topic is effect of pre-analytical variables on laboratory testing. It's a part of quality control chapter that is newly added in your MCI syllabus, and as a continuation of this quality control, I would like to discuss some of the important variables that have got a huge effect or the impact on the laboratory testing. Now, from both clinical laboratory studies, there is a widespread perception that most of the time the report error does not, most of the time you would have come across in a clinical practice, someone's thyroid report has been seen by the medical practitioner and he says how it could be a TSH is so elevated, and most of the time they blame the laboratory people. Most of the time you get a case in a casualty, suppose the patient has come with a road traffic accident, such kind of cases, and they without proper precaution, the nurse has collected the blood sample and is sent for the electrolyte analysis, let is sodium and potassium. Most of the time the potassium, there will be moderate elevation in the potassium because the gross error in the sample collection, if you commit any error in during the specimen collection, it can give rise to wrong reports because many pre-analytical factors are going to impact your laboratory results. In this case, if they have not followed the proper precautions of sample collection, there is always possibility of hemolysis, which could be the main reason for elevated potassium levels. The hemolyzed sample, if you do the blood potassium examination, a hemolyzed sample, definitely the potassium is going to be raised. So in that case, you are going to ask for the repeat blood sample again and you are going to analyze in the laboratory. So now, what is pre-analytical error, what is analytical, what is post-analytical? The three terminologies that you need to remember. The pre-analytical errors are the one which are going to account for 70% of them. Most of the time doctors say that this lab report is wrong, this lab report is not correct, how can this potassium is high? But they do not know that there are errors which are related to the specimen collection that has happened at the nursing staff level, which is accounting for the erroneous laboratory result. It is not because of the laboratory, the analysis or the analyzer, the machines what we are using. Most of the time they tend to blame like that, but most of the time remember one fact that 70% of the errors do occur in pre-analytical phase, before the analysis of the sample. That includes the patient preparation, that includes the sample collection, sample transportation. All these factors will account for erroneous errors. If there is any error in this phase, it can lead to the larger impact on the laboratory results. Now, Phases of laboratory testing. Suppose if somebody wants to get his fasting blood sugar and PP blood sugar, get it done for the monitoring of his diabetes status. Now, any laboratory testing involves three phases. One is pre-analytical, analytical and post-analytical. Pre-analytical means first the patient walks into your OPD or the laboratory, and in the sample collection area the patient is seated in the sample collection area, and the staff, the lab technician or the nursing staff collect the sample that comes under pre-analytical phase, and they're going to enter the data about this patient, and sometimes you may receive the sample directly from the wards, right? And sample transportation till it reaches suppose the sample has been collected in the medicine ward or surgical ward, it has to reach to the laboratory. That phase we call it as sample transportation phase. And once the sample has reached the laboratory, there's something called sample preparation. Most of the biochemical analysis do require serum or plasma for the estimation. We do not use whole blood except for HbA1c. We do use whole blood. Apart from that, most of the investigation that we carry out, 90% of the investigation that we carry out in our biochemistry laboratory is basically we require serum or plasma, and most commonly we do use serum, and the fluoride samples we do use for the blood glucose estimation. So for which you need a centrifugation. That's a machine called centrifuge, which is going to separate the RBCs from the plasma and the serum. Thus it is going to separate the serum which is used for the analysis. So analytical phase is nothing but using the biochemical equipment. We have got a semi-automated analyzer. In your UG laboratory we have used colorimeter, right, for taking the OD absorbance. Similarly in clinical biochemistry lab we do use automated biochemistry analyzer. So the analysis part is taken care within the laboratory by ensuring the quality control. How do you assure that today I have got my fasting blood sugar and PP blood sugar done it from RIMS lab, and how do I say that most of the time you would have noticed that for the first time someone comes, a 40-year-old man comes and he gets his FBS PPBS done for the first time. The FBS going to be 250 and RBS or the PPBS going to be 400. Gets into, oh no, this is not possible because 6 months back I got my blood sugars done, it was absolutely normal, this lab is wrong, and going to start blaming you, right? So how do you say that no, your report is right? The sample collection was absolutely perfect with respect to sample collection, transportation. There was no error in these phases. Number one, you are going to convince the patient that our machine is working properly, because we do run something called quality control every day. What do you mean by quality control? It is nothing but a sort of serum sample that we use it in our laboratory, and it has got a defined values that the company vendor offers a particular range of parameters. For example, I have a quality control material with me which is nothing but a serum. It is an artificial serum having the known values. So the company will send us that every day you have to run 2 levels of control, level 1 and level 2. So suppose the blood glucose of the level 1 is about, they will give you the range within 3ST, that is 90 to 100 is the range. Suppose every day I am running the quality, I already know the value of this quality control, the glucose value in this quality control should be between 90 to 100. If I am getting that value within that range 90 to 100, I ensure that yes, my quality control is proper, then the machine is working properly and the patient report is absolutely right. So that is, we call it as quality control. There is something called internal quality control and there is something called external quality control. Internal quality control we run every day in our laboratory, ensure that our machine is working properly and our laboratory parameters are absolutely fine, and our reports are going to be, they are going to be assured our reports are absolutely fine. So to have that commitment, we have a quality control results in our labs. So that involves the analytics. So one thing, you are going to convince the patient saying that we do run quality control every day to ensure that our analytical phase is not having any errors. Number 2, you can ask the patient, if you have still a doubt, we can repeat your sample. Kindly come tomorrow again in the fasting and get your FBS PPBS done. And still the patient gets the same results, and you are going to advice for the other laboratory supportive investigation for diabetes like HbA1c and all. So but to prove that your results are right, so one thing you are going to show, you are going to talk about the quality control of your laboratory. And number 2, you can talk about the you can talk about the reputation of the sample. Next, coming to the number 3, somebody is telling about NABL accreditation. Okay, it is good that at your UG level you are aware of NABL accredited. It is something called NABL, that is National Accreditation Board of Laboratories. This is one private organization which checks for the quality of the laboratory, both external as well as internal quality of the laboratory, and they do analyze the sample. And what is external quality control? External quality control is nothing but the proficiency testing. The other name for external quality control is proficiency testing. It involves that there are some centers like in India we have for biochemistry especially I'm talking about, we have CMC Vellore. CMC Vellore has got its own it is an external quality control body. It is a proficiency testing laboratory. It do send a sample to all the laboratories whoever have been registered with them. They send every month one sample. For the month of January, they have sent one sample to us. What we are supposed to do, whatever the parameters that we are doing in our lab, we are doing blood glucose, we are doing urea, creatinine, SGLT, PT, LFT, RFT, all that investigation. They have sent us the sample. What we are going to do, we are going to analyze that sample in our laboratory and we are going to get the results. And since I have joined this institute of since the last year October, I have started this program in our institute, and our results are absolutely fine. Out of 7 parameters, most of the time we have got 16 parameters in line. 1 or 2 parameters have crossed 2 SD, but most of the time at least 15 parameters of our laboratory are within the range. I am really feel proud about that. I have already started participating in external quality control for our clinical biochemistry laboratory, and we are getting the results every month. We have started from the January. Usually the cycle begins from January to the December, and every day we do send our, every month we do send our report, and they will give us the results. Like suppose for the month of January, I have analyzed the CMC Vellore sample and I have got the readings on. And what do? I will going to enter those results in their portal, in the CMC Vellore EQUAS program portal. I am going to enter my results of the RIMS laboratory. What they do, they have sent this sample to n number of laboratories wherever they have got a registration, right? So once they analyze all the samples depending upon the type of instrument, the name of the instrument. Some may be having a Mindray company, some may be working with the EM360, because many brands of instruments are there. So they are going to do one analysis and they are going to fix the something called standard deviation. We call it as the standard deviation +1, +2, plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3 ST. Okay, so you please read about standard deviation. If our values are fitting within 2 standard deviation, they are going to give you something called as Z score. This Z score of our laboratory, for each parameter they are going to give. It is also called as SDI, that is standard deviation index, and VIS score, variation index score. The variation index score has got the readings like less than 100, 100 to 20, to 100 to 200, 200 to 400 and above 400. So like that they have a scale. If your performance is good, suppose take an example for January month, CMC sample has got a blood glucose. I got in my laboratory as 98, and when they analyzed and compared with the peripheral laboratories, their values were 96. Definitely my values are better. 98 and 96 are almost closer. That means it is falling within the Z score, within the variation index score. That means our laboratory performance is absolutely alright. It cannot be like something like the CMC glucose was 200 and my laboratory have reported 90 of the same value. Definitely you cannot accept 90 and 200. So that means that our glucose is not proper. The glucose test that we are doing in our laboratory is not correct, and we have to take a corrective action for that. So that is how we do something called external quality control and internal quality control. So now that's about the analytical phase. How to assure analytical phase that it is absolutely fine, it's going well. It is with the help of the quality control checks, internal and external quality control, and also you have got something called the 1ST, 2ST, the statistical indexes that we are going to use. Okay, we are going to take the mean for the 20 days and we are going to calculate. Anyway, for your level, I don't want to discuss about all the aspects. Next is post analytical. So most of the time you would have noticed that in the machine the patient sample has shown blood glucose as 104 or 106. Sometimes when the error can happen at the transcription. When the technician was entering the data in the computer system from the machine. So there may be sometimes error. Instead of 106 she has written 206. Instead of 108, somebody who has no knowledge about glucose estimation, they would have typed it as 10.8. So these kind of errors do happen in post-analytical phase. Sometimes there may be error with the name. The two individuals having Manu 28-year-old, Manu 40-year-old, sometimes this can happen. Just they check the name of the patient and they just take the report, but they don't even know that there are two Manus in the medicine ward, one with 28-year-old, one with the 40-year-old. That is why name, age, diagnosis is very important. Otherwise, the 28-year-old Manu's report will reach 48-year-old man, and the 48-year-old man's report will reach 28-year-old man. Maybe he is suffering from acute pancreatitis, the other person is suffering from diabetes, then there is a definitely mismatch of the reports. Such kind of things has to be taken care in the post-analytical phase. Mainly the transcriptional error and the patient identification error, these are all very important, that we call it as post-analytical phase of the laboratory testing. In the pre-analytical phase, the physician orders the test. It involves the various series like physician ordering the test and the sample drawing. Most of the time you would have come across one common error that takes place in the laboratory. They have advised for the fasting lipid profile. Most of the time the nursing staff who is taking care of that particular patient doesn't even know that the lipid profile has to be done in the fasting. Nowadays, again the criteria for lipid profile has changed. Earlier it was mandatory to do the lipid profile in the fasting, but these days they do even on the random basis as well. So the nursing staff who is not even aware that the lipid profile has to be done in the fasting, she may take the sample after the patient takes his breakfast, and there will be shoot up in the triacylglycerol levels, which could be the again wrong report that you are going to the patient. So that is the reason all the test conditions has to be noted down properly. And how do you advise fasting blood sample? That's the nursing staff who is appointed in that particular ward, and the laboratory technician should be aware of all this type of specimens, what is the mode of collection, what are the precautions that you are going to advise the patient. They are very important. Sample transportation, then delivery of the sample and sample processing. So these all come under pre-analytical phase. And what are these pre-analytical errors that we are going to discuss now? Errors that are made in the period prior to the analysis of the sample, it may influence the quality of the reports and compromise the diagnosis and treatment of the patient. So hence what we do say that no report is better than the wrong report. The person who does not have hyperthyroidism because of your analytical phase error or the pre-analytical phase error, you are going to give the patient the report as hypothyroidism, then definitely she has to start taking the treatment unnecessarily, even though she does not have any disease. Because of your report error, the patient is, of course you are going to correlate with the clinical symptom, but sometimes there is a possibility that the subclinical phase of the disease you can still have such kind of scenarios. The type of pre-analytical errors, we should know about these variables, then only a correct interpretation is possible. Remember, we are treating the patient, not the laboratory numbers. The patient variables like patient identification, preparation of the patient, specimen variables, phlebotomy technique, test collection procedure, specimen transportation, specimen processing and specimen storage. Now, patient identification. Check the patient identification by proper name, age, gender, address, IP number and OPD number. Collection tubes wrongly labeled. The nurse has collected the sample from the A patient and she has labeled it as B. Patient belongs to patient B. Definitely such sample is exchanged now. You are going to give the patient's A report to B and B reports to A. Then how is it justifiable? Unnamed specimen. Sometimes the medical staff are so busy that they have collected from 1 to 10 beds samples and they have not even labeled it. How are we going to identify them? So it is called as unnamed specimen tubes. Again, it's a dangerous zone. Hence where we use something called barcode. Barcoding is the better way to avoid the patient identification errors. The moment the patient sample you go, the patient walks into your laboratory for the sample collection, you have to fix the barcode on the sample collection tube. Then you have to collect the sample with the help of barcode. This patient identification error could be minimized. The patient preparation. Suppose the physician says that the fasting blood sample has to be collected for the patient. You have to collect it in the fasting itself. Especially for the glucose, the fasting sample we do recommend only for glucose. Nowadays even for cholesterol we do not recommend. It is only for glucose that we require fasting blood specimen. And postprandial blood specimen mostly we require for glucose only. Rest all the parameters we can done, and we can do it any time of the day. We call it random blood sample is more than sufficient to do other parameters. Before or after medication dose, most of the patient you would have noticed, especially in a diabetic patient, this is a very commonly happening error. I do advise the patient, you come tomorrow in the fasting for the fasting blood sugar, and come after 2 hours of having breakfast and come for the PP blood sugar. She is on metformin, she is on glimepiride, or she is on gliclazide, so on treatment. On the day of sample collection, she thinks that it has to be taken without taking the tablet. The previous night she was supposed to take 1 tablet before dinner. Because I have advised her for fasting blood sample and PP sample tomorrow, she thinks there is no need to take tablet. She misses her tablet in the night, and tomorrow she comes with the fasting blood sugar of 400 milligram per deciliter. And she was supposed to take tablet on the same day after 20 minutes before breakfast, and she forgets to take on that day because she wants to give blood sample. And PP sugars are around 600. How do you justify? She is going to blame you directly. What, doctor? I am getting FPS 400 and PPBS. Your tablets are not at all, they are not useful for me. I'm going to blame you. What do you say? You have to collect the detailed history from the patient. Many times this kind of scenarios are happening in your clinical practice. You have to take the proper history. Did you take yesterday night tablet or not? Did you take in the morning tablet or not? Take the history. Then you are going to blame the patient. It is your mistake. Did I say you to miss the tablet? So this is an important advice to the patient, that they are not going to miss the tablet. They will be taking the tablets as per their protocol, but they have to give the sample with the medication, not without the medication. That is very important. This scenario also happens with thyroid patients. Most of the patients for the thyroid testing, especially for the follow-up patients who are on severe hypothyroidism, we do monitor something called free, that is FT4 and TSH in those patients who are suffering from severe hypothyroidism. On the day of blood sample, they are going to forget to take thyroxine tablet. Morning, they are supposed to take thyroxine tablet every day morning in the empty stomach. Even the doctor, the physician advises before brushing the teeth, you should take your Thyronorm tablet. But the smart patients, most of the time what happens, they will miss the tablet on the day of sample, and definitely there will be shoot up of your TSH values, and you are going to again modify the dose. Next time she will come with the severe hyperthyroidism. This is happening. That's the reason you have to give proper advice to the patient, otherwise you will get all errors. So the patient preparation aspect is very important. And the fasting, when you say fasting sample, no coffee, no tea, only plain water is allowed. That's all. And at specific time in a hormonal cycle, there are some hormonal tests like FSH, LH, prolactin, which has to be done on the particular day of the menstrual cycle. If you do not do it on that particular day, you may not get the proper result that you wanted to know. So at a specific time in a hormonal cycle is also very important. These are some of the important aspects about the patient preparation. Now, there is something called TAT. TAT is nothing but turnaround time. It is a time elapsed from when a test was ordered until the test report was released. Sometimes the TAT may be prolonged when there is a wrong specimen collection or loss of liquidation forms and reports which will contribute to the delayed TAT. then laboratory logs, the patient details and the laboratory requisition form and the specimen tube labeling should match. Record the specimen collection, receipt to the lab, report test. Delay can be prevented by point of care testing in emergency conditions. Now the collection of sample, most commonly used sample in your OPD or IPD basis, venous sample. Arterial is used for ABG analysis, that is arterial blood gas analysis, and the capillary blood most commonly we use for point of care testing. That is like with the help of glucometer we do get our blood glucose tested, that we call it as capillary blood. And next specimen is urine specimen and various body fluids. Now one question I'll ask you, in amino acid metabolism, urine test plays an important role in the diagnosis of which amino acid metabolism disorder? Yes, can anyone please tell me? Or you can directly tell me the disease name in which we are going to, urine plays an important role. You have studied amino acid metabolism, you have studied the amino acid ureas or the disorders related to the amino acid metabolism. Can you tell me urine sample where it is required, the diagnosis of which disorders? You can list out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can tell me. Yes, anyone? Tryptophan, phenyl keto, okay, it is a qualitative test, that you mean FeCl3 test, a ferric chloride test, okay, that is a qualitative test. Anything else? Can anyone tell me the quantitative test plays an important role in the diagnosis of one particular disease? Guthrie test. Guthrie test is a microbiological test. No, it's again a qualitative test. I am asking about quantitative test, where that disease could be one of the reason for hypertension, secondary hypertension. Yes, no answers. It starts from P. The answer starts from P. Okay, alkaptonuria, all that is fine. Qualitative test. Quantitative test, you tell me. Yes, the disease name starts from P. Giving you the clue. Not cystinuria. Again, cystinuria, it is qualitative test. Anything else? Pheochromocytoma. To diagnose pheochromocytoma, we use something called urine VMA test. Urine metanephrines. Urine free metanephrines. The quantitative estimation of these parameters are done in the diagnosis of pheochromocytoma. Please do remember this was one of the cause for the secondary hypertension. Next, blood collection sites. Venous sample we are going to collect from median cubital vein or cephalic vein. Arterial blood mostly from the radial and femoral artery and the brachial artery. Can anyone tell me this femoral artery puncturing is done in which particular investigation in elderly patients? One procedure in especially elderly people is performed using this femoral artery. Can anyone guess the answer? Especially who have a long history of diabetes, long history of hypertension, landing up with heart blockage in their heart, or the coronary artery thrombus, or CAD, we call it as coronary artery disease. So can anyone tell me which procedure we use femoral artery? Of course, radial artery also they do use, which is mainly performed by cardiologist. Now at least you should be able to pick up the clue. When you are reading anatomy, the surgical anatomy or the clinical importance of femoral artery, you should be knowing about this. Can you please tell me the answer? Cardiac catheterization or coronary angiogram. Okay, coronary angiogram is performed using this femoral or radial artery. Next, capillary blood. In pediatric cases, we do use something called medial and lateral plantar surface of the heels. In the older children, plantar surface of the big toe or earlobe. Adults, the palmar surface. See, always some of your parents may be diabetic or grandparents may be diabetic. They may be having self-monitoring of blood glucose at their home with using glucometer. One important advice that you are going to tell them today itself is that whenever you are checking a blood glucose, with the help of glucometer, please do use third and fourth finger only. Do not use first finger, do not use second finger, not even the little finger. There is a reason for that, that you are going, that is will be your homework. Why we are not using index finger, thumb and the little finger for blood glucose testing with the help of glucometer? Why do we prefer third and fourth finger only, that to the lateral aspect of the third and fourth finger? It's very important. Okay, so you can give them this advice, which is really very important. Next, in case of children, we do use medial and lateral surface of the plantar aspect of the foot. And first you are going to clean the puncture site and puncture the finger with the help of lancet, and wipe up the first drop of the blood. Whenever you are doing a glucometer testing, the first blood has to be wiped up, because there are sometimes there may be dilution of this blood sample with the antiseptic that you have used to clean the area. 70% alcohol, when you use, at least you should allow 30 seconds to dry. Most of the time what happens, we just clean the area with the alcohol and we immediately pick it. So there will be a dilution, because some amount of alcohol is not yet dried up. So there may be dilution of the sample. Maybe you may get low values in that case. That's why either you wait for 30 seconds or you wipe off the first drop of the blood. And the second drop should be ideally used for any sort of testing. Keep it in your mind. After that you apply the pressure to the site, and so that the bleeding will arrest. Where to exactly prick the finger? It is on the lateral aspect of the fingertip. So this is the picture to show that. And because the more nerve, the reason for this is that the more nerve endings are located in the fingerprint area of the fingers, therefore more pain results. If you are going to prick it in the center, definitely there are more nerve endings here. It is going to be very painful for the patient. That's the reason you have to use the lateral aspect of the finger, so that the nerve endings are very less in that site of the finger. Can anyone tell me what is the difference between these two tubes? There are two tubes here belonging to the same patient. Tube 1 and tube 2, just with the naked appearance, what is the difference you can make out? Can anyone tell me? What is the difference between the first sample and the second sample? It belongs to the same patient, because the ID number is same, 1302013, all that 1302. Right one has PCV cardiac. Pradyum Sharma, I am not expecting too much hi-fi answers. I want my first year MBBS student to answer at this level itself. Please do not go for very hi-fi answers. We are not expecting that much. Okay. What is the difference between the two? PCV and all, how can you comment on PCV right now? Just with the naked appearance, when you are watching these two samples, as a layman, what you can make out? That's what I am asking. Color, very good. That is what exactly I wanted. Himanshu, you have answered me that color. Yes. The second sample looks darker than the first sample, right? First sample looks lighter, second sample looks darker, right? When you estimate the hemoglobin in this patient, it was found to be, it is a real case that has happened in our laboratory, in the previous place where I was working. I had taken the live case itself. In the first sample, we had reported the hemoglobin as 10 because the physician got a doubt, because patient was not anemic. Second sample we have taken and we got the value of 13.8, something like that, HV. Now, can anyone tell me what could be the reason why it has happened? You think it is a machine problem, or the 3-part or the 5-part analyzer that we have used for hemoglobin estimation was not correct? There was some problem with the machine? Analytical phase? No. Can anyone guess what is the answer? Air bubble? No. Why do air bubble create light and dark sample? No. Anything else? Anything else you want to say? One is more diluted. You are right. What is this? Pranjal Agarwal. You have answered me that One is more diluted. Yes, you are right. Absolutely, the answer is that there's a dilution of the sample. But what could be the reason? Dilution, I do agree. That means the technician had already poured the distilled water in the tube and then she collected the sample. Because of that, it has resulted in dilution. Do you think that? That is the answer? No. Can anyone tell me? No answers? The patient mixing with alcohol or tube may not be, no, that's not the answer. Okay, let me answer this question. The patient was on IV fluids. The patient was having, hypotension, because of which the patient was on IV fluids. Without stopping the IV fluid, the nurse, for the ease of the work, she has to stop the IV fluid at least for 1 complete minute to take the sample from that IV line itself. Otherwise, she could have taken it from the other hand, where because the other hand was not having any IV fluid, only on the left hand there was IV fluid going on in the patient. She should have turned off the IV fluid for a while and then she should have collected the sample, but she didn't do that. Directly she had collected the sample from the IV line where the IV fluids were continuously going on. That's the reason it has resulted in the dilution of the sample. The other sample was collected from the other hand, hence we got the HBS. So this kind of errors do happen in the laboratory. And finally what they will say? Lab is always wrong. One time they are giving 10, another time they are giving 13. What is this? But they do not know what mistake they have done at their level. That's why education of this paramedical staff is very, very important pertaining to the patient care. Now, the recommended order of the draw. Suppose the same patient is having different tests written by the physician. So, he had ordered microbiological test, pathological test and a biochemical test for the same patient. So, you have collected the blood 5 ml. From the 5 ml syringe, you have drawn the blood sample. Now, in which tube you have to first put the sample? That's very important. That's we call it the order of draw. First, you are going to put it for the blood culture bottle. Second one for coagulation tube, wherein CT, BT, INR results have to be delivered. Number 3, serum tube, which is used for biochemical test. Number 4, heparin tube. Number 5, EDTA tube used for CBC. And this number 6, at last you are going to pour the sample into the fluoride tube, which is used for blood sugar estimation. So do please remember this. This is blood culture bottle, then number 2 coagulation tube, number 3 serum tube, number 4 heparin tube, number 5 EDTA, number 6 fluoride tube. So this order of draw is very important. So this part it is not important for you guys. And okay. Next, whenever you are collecting the blood sample, first you are going to use the tourniquet. You are going to tie the tourniquet about the cubital fossa. Then, what is the effect of this tourniquet on the blood sample? Suppose if you tie it too tight for longer time, there will be muscle contraction, there will be more release of calcium, and your blood sample may show elevated calcium level. It could be hypercalcemia. So, you should not tie the tourniquet too tightly, or it should not be for more time, longer time. In either case, it will result in the muscle contraction, leading to the false elevation of the serum calcium levels. Then preparation of the venipuncture site using alcohol saturated with 70%. One question for you guys, why we should not use 90% alcohol for cleaning the venipuncture site? You please find the answer and tell me. Cleans the skin in the area of the venipuncture using the circular motion. You take a cotton ball using circular motion from inward to outward. Okay, that should be the that should be the type of preparation that you are going to do. Using a cotton ball, the movement will be from inward to outward to clean the area in the circular motion. From center, it will move outward. Do not go back over any area of the skin once it has been cleaned. Allow the site to dry for 30 seconds. Most of them do not follow this step at all, because of which there is a dilution of the sample and there may be low values that you are going to get. So if you do not allow proper drying up to 30 seconds, this is going to be an impact on the laboratory results. No alcohol should remain on the skin because traces, and another important reason is that even the trace amount of alcohol that is used for antiseptic could cause hemolysis. Then there will be elevation of potassium levels and it can invalidate the test result. Then the doctors start blaming the lab. Oh, this lab has given potassium 6. There's something wrong with the lab. But they do not know that this was the error that has taken place inside the ward itself. And because of suppose the following parameters will alter due to prolonged tourniquet application from 1 to 3 minutes. The tourniquet has to be applied less than 1 minute. Suppose someone who is not expertised in sample collection, he has tied the tourniquet for 3 minutes and he has taken the sample. After that, there may be elevation of total protein, iron, then total lipids, cholesterol, ASTC. Larger impact is there on these parameters because of the small mistake that you have done at your level. So it can cause false elevation of these parameters. Effect of fist clenching: if you ask someone to fist clench it too strongly, what can happen? It can result in rise in the potassium, that is about 1 to 2 millimole per liter potassium can rise, and as much as up to 2.7 it can go up to. So it's very important. Next is hemolysis. The hemolysis, this is how the hemolyzed sample looks. Normally it should be, the serum will be pale yellow and the hemolyzed sample will look, if it is, the concentration is very high, it is going to be dark red. So if the sample after centrifugation, if it is like this, you can accept it. Even little bit of hemolysis you can accept it, about 20 concentration, but even up to 50 to 100 you can accept it, but you are going to reject once it looks very dark red in color. Effect of hemolysis. Hemolyzed sample, once you use for the analysis, it can have a shoot up in LDH and isocitrate dehydrogenase and ACP, potassium magnesium phosphate, and there may be a decrease in the bilirubin level, especially for a jaundiced baby where the pediatrician is concerned about the monitoring of this total bilirubin and direct and indirect bilirubin, because of which he has to decide for the phototherapy. If we are going to have the hemolyzed sample, there may be decreased bilirubin concentration, and definitely it is again challenging for the pediatrician to rely on the laboratory results. It can cause shoot up of TG, cholesterol, creatinine, and urine sample collection. Sometimes we use random urine sample, sometimes we use timed specimen, sometimes we used fasting urine sample, sometimes we use 24-hour urine sample. Suppose today 8 o'clock morning I started, I asked the patient to start collecting the sample for 24 hours. At the 8 o'clock today morning, that sample has to be discarded, and tomorrow 8 o'clock sample has to be included. That's how we are going to collect the urine sample for 24 hours. So what are the urine preservatives that could be used commonly? Like 10 grams of boric acid for estriol, estrogen and aldosterone, and HCl for calcium estimation, because sometimes we do estimate something called 24-hour urine calcium. VMA, I said you, vanil mandelic acid, and 5-HIAA. Sodium fluoride for glucose. And transportation, you have to prioritize the sample for transport. Send the sample to the lab through the closed containers and send the sample to the appropriate, not like biochemistry test, you are giving the sample to microbiology people, not the microbiology specimen you are going to give for the biochemistry lab. So be clear what you are doing and where the sample has to reach. Generally whole blood we use for hemoglobin, lactate, lead and pyruvate and G6-PDH, even HbA1c. Plasma we do prefer in biochemistry, we do prefer plasma for ammonia, amino acid, corticotropin, aldosterone, CEA, estradiol, FFA and fibrinogen. That's free fatty acids. Serum for glucose, LFT, RFT, sodium, potassium, chloride, copper, ceruloplasmin, iron, protein, electrophoresis, we use serum sample. Once the sample is separated and the plasma could be stored for 2 to 3 days at 4 degrees centigrade for level concentrations like CK, LDH and polypeptide hormone should be frozen. What is the criteria for rejection of the sample? Once the sample is collected and it has been clotted, hemolyzed sample, underfilled, overfilled samples, incorrect labeling, unlabeled specimen, no patient preparation, incorrect patient, incorrect specimen, too old to process, broken and leaking containers, we are not going to accept such kind of sample to our laboratory. So these are the factors which are going to affect the pre-analytical phase, like controllable and uncontrollable, like age, sex, influence of menstrual cycle, pregnancy, stress, trauma and shock, surgery. Controllable factors like posture, then prolonged bed rest, exercise, circadian variation, food ingestion, smoking, alcohol, drug administration. The changes in the serum cancer from lying to standing, so it can have impact on albumin, calcium, thyroxine and triacylglycerol, cholesterol and ALP, orthostatic proteinuria. Due to shift of the fluid between intravascular and interstitial compartment, the effect of exercise can have shoot up of blood glucose, then pyruvate, lactate, creatinine, urea, AST, LDH, CK and aldolase. And urinal variation, like peak you are going to get for cortisol at 6 to 8 and minimum at 10 pm, and in the late evening again there may be shoot up of 3 to 6 fold, and growth hormone peaks around 10 pm, maximum during sleep and minimum at walking time. Renin and aldosterone peak around 8 am and low in the late evening, and changes with the posture. Catecholamine secretion in the urine less during the night. Effective surgical procedures after the patient has undergone operations. Suppose he has undergone appendicectomy. So if you do the analysis of these parameters, there can be shoot up of CK, CKMB, AST, LDH and 1 and LDH5, because the source of all these parameters is from the muscle, where the whenever any surgery is performed, definitely the musculature, you have to make an incision on the muscle, and definitely there's a cut in the muscle which is going to release these kind of enzymes, and there may be fall shoot up of these enzymes. There's nothing to worry. Once the operation is done and 5 to 6 days the patient recovers, then all these parameters are going to be within the normal limits. And effect of meal and the laboratory meal reports: after meal there may be decrease in chloride, phosphate, potassium. After meal there may be increase in gastrin, growth hormone, insulin, calcium, TG and urine. That's the reason now the fasting lipid profile is done, because there will be shoot up of triacylglycerols after the meal. Smoking can cause increase in albumin, cholesterol, glucose, phospholipids, TGs and urea as well. Alcohol can cause decrease in glucose and decrease in testosterone, but yes, it causes raised shoot up of triacylglycerol, then lactate, uric acid, cortisol, gamma GT. Safety measures: practice universal precaution, wear gloves, laboratory coat or gown when handling the blood and body fluids, change glove after each patient or when it's contaminated, wash hands frequently, dispose of items in appropriate containers, dispose the needles immediately upon the removal from the patient's vein, clean up any blood spill with the disinfectant such as freshly prepared 1% sodium hypochlorite. How do you prevent the errors? First of all, you are going to train your paramedical staff with respect to phlebotomy education, continuation of medical education, phlebotomy staffing, technology. So the pre-analytical errors are very huge in number, accounting for 70% of the total errors in the laboratory testing. Hence, the minimizing these errors is very important and it plays an important role in the better patient diagnosis and the treatment aspect. So we are going to end this class now. Thank you for patient listening.